If you're a business owner who podcasts, or if you're just a podcaster, you may ask yourself, which is the best option? Should you have a whole website dedicated to your show? Or is it just okay to have a tab on your website to drive traffic to your podcast? Could that affect how people perceive your business? All of these questions are very, very common, and I get them all the time. So I thought I would invite Aime Cox, who's the founder of Studio Cotton, a small web design company that works with small business owners and podcasters and people who do both, of course. And I asked her some of these questions that I know you've been having. What are the best ways to get new users to subscribe to the podcast? What should you include in your show notes so that Google finds you? And also the question about transcripts. Should you have them on your show notes or not? This conversation with Aime is going to be so insightful. I learned so much. I shared a lot of the things that I've been testing myself here at the podcast space. So I would invite you to stay all the way to the end. And if you're new here, I'm Annick Xavier. I'm the founder of the podcast space. I'm a podcast marketer and strategist that helps impact-driven business owners reach their communities, grow their influence, and stand out without overwhelm. Let's dive into this episode of the podcast space. Aime, welcome to the show. Very excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me.
I gotta say that for folks who don't follow you on Instagram, they have to stop, pause this episode, and go and do it because every single week that I see your content, I'm like, she's done it again. She's done it again. She found a way to talk about SEO in a way that is approachable, practical, and that always I find that I try to stay like bare minimum aware of knowledge of SEO and websites. But every single time I see your stuff, and I'm like, this is the most practical way to look at this. And it's fun and appealing. So gotta fangirl over your strategy here. So thank you for that. Every single week, I learn so much.
No, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I feel like because the kind of topics I talk about are so dry, even though I try to make them a bit whimsical and fun, sometimes I feel like that's just not what the Instagram algorithm wants anymore. But it's good to know that when it does get through to people, it is appreciated because I put a lot of effort into trying to force people to think about SEO a little bit more.
Yeah. And I feel like there's different ways to approach it, right? Like there's the people who have like really slick, like super fast video and they're like breaking it down and it's just like all these animations. And I'm like, no, I want my content on a carousel photo format. Like I want to be like multi-page scrolling through or like reading the caption, having my own time. So I appreciate that you're creating content that is different than the high dynamic videos that I'm not ready for it. I'm an older
I couldn't
millennial.
do the video editing anyway. I'm very old school. In fact, I actually still make my Instagram posts in PowerPoint. That's how old school I am.
Stop!
So
That is insane. They
I
look so
know.
good. You're not a Canva
Thank you.
girly.
Honestly, Canva didn't have one setting that I wanted 5 years ago, and I've never looked back. I'm sticking to my trusty PowerPoint.
But it just goes to show that, it doesn't matter what tool you use. If you use it well and you make it work for you, it can still look beautiful and like super appealing. So interesting. Okay, this is not where I thought we were going to go, but here we are. Awesome. All right, so let's dive into the first thing because I like making sure that our interviews are jam-packed with value. So I want to talk about for business owners or for leaders who are considering either they have their website, they maybe have the website for like forever ago. It's an old website and they're on that stage where they're like maybe 80 episodes in or 30 episodes in. And they're like, should I have a page for my podcast on my website or should I have a whole website dedicated to it? Knowing that, of course, you're going to have a little bit of bias, but I trust that you're going to present us with like the best information out there. What's the best strategy for each person?
So I think the way to kind of make the decision or to frame the decision is the best possible business website and the best possible podcast website are not the same website. Like the things that we want to do on a podcast website to get as many new listeners and as much engagement and as many people subscribing as possible, the way that we kind of format and optimize a website to do that isn't necessarily the same way to like optimize a business's website to get inquiries for their services. So I generally say that the time at which to maybe split your podcast into its own website is when you want to grow that website and focus that website as almost like its own brand, its own product, so that you don't have to kind of compromise your business's website at the same time. That's not to say that you always have to have two separate websites. It's just that, yeah, if you really want your podcast to be its own thing that can still power your business and still send all of those valuable leads to your business, it might be worth considering putting it onto its own domain and giving it its own space.
Mm. So I can imagine podcasters already thinking about this thing, which is like, well, if I start creating a lot of content through my podcast that sometimes is not necessarily like a perfect alignment to the business that they
Hmm.
have, could it be diluting the keywords associated with their brand, or doesn't it do it at all?
I wouldn't worry too much about dilution, but I think say that one of the other big benefits is having that almost like commercial break between the brand and the podcast. So between the business and the podcast brand, because it might be that you want to speak to somebody who might be a direct competitor of your own business. Like say you're a leading photographer and you want to interview another photographer, but they feel a bit awkward having their interview associated with your photography brand. So in that time, sometimes it can almost be like a little airlock between your own business and your podcast as well, that makes your guests potentially feel more safe, or even your sponsors feel a bit more safe if you've maybe got a service that competes with a potential sponsor too.
That makes sense. So I started the podcast space in 2020, and at the time, I was not like having a podcast was not in my head. I was like, I'm a production agency. I want to focus on creating articles and blogs so that I drive traffic to the website. And I remember thinking, oh wow, like I want my friend Tony, who runs a media company. He shoots ads for companies and he does documentaries. He's so talented. And I was like, Tony, couldn't you? Because I'm not a techie person. And I'm like, I could not care less for tech. So I'm like, can you create a blog for me where you're actually teaching people to create good lighting for podcasts and how they can use light to give different vibes and all that? And he's like, yes, of course. So fun fact, like that article, because I was like, the bare minimum information there, I'll just like beef it up with other stuff. And now a lot of people find him and send him that article to him and go, "Oh my God, I found your article on this website, the podcast space." And he's like, "Anna, another one." And I'm like, yes, like
Yeah.
it's one of one of the most searched results and one of the pages that has like the most visitors
Hmm.
from something that I was just like on a whim decided to
Yeah,
do it.
yeah.
And like I don't do production anymore, so there's no like potential for like overlap. But I was like, it's really interesting that sometimes like inadvertently you can create something that is like a
Hmm.
clash that sends money somewhere else. So be so be mindful of those interviews. Cause yeah. Anyway, as a side note. So let's dive into a little bit more of like what it needs to look like if people want to go down the route of having their own website for their show. Let's talk about some benefits there.
So the first thing that I look at are I almost like build it backwards, and I start with the individual page for those individual episodes. And that's because when we're talking about search engine optimization, most of the time when we're talking about websites, we're talking about that search engine being Google. And this is where in the podcast world, things get a little bit messy, because when I hear people talk about podcast SEO, sometimes they're talking about that search bar that lives in Shopify or in Apple Podcasts. And so I try to like clarify that when I'm talking about SEO in this context right now, I'm talking about Google. But Google lists pages in its search results. So if your individual episodes aren't individual pages on your website, it means that those episodes are unlikely to appear in Google search results. So we want to make sure that each episode has its own really thorough page so that it's many people who are Googling something that you've answered in that episode can find that episode as well. And I think a lot of podcasters do kind of rely on Google sending people to their homepage, but it's almost like if you've got an online shop, you would much rather your customers land directly on a product because you're much closer to the basket. We would much rather podcast listeners land on an episode because they are much closer to that subscribe button. So the first thing we want to do is to make that page what we would say is really rich. Just make sure it's got lots of stuff on it. So to have that episode title, to make the title of that episode like meaty. One thing that's like a really small SEO win is to not just call your episode 1 series 2, to actually have like a wordy but literal description in it. And if you are an interview style podcast, have your guest's name in there so that when someone Googles the name of your guest, your podcast comes up second or third. Your guest's website will come up first, but huge value being that second or third result as well.
Yeah.
We want to make sure that you have links straight away to get people onto the platform that they already listen to. As much as we'd love for someone to like linger on our website and spend 45 minutes with one of our website pages open, it's much better for podcasts in the long run to get into people's Shopify. I'm always saying Shopify and Spotify around the wrong way.
Yes.
But we want to get listeners into your Spotify playing habit. We want to get someone onto the platform where they are already listening to their podcast too. So even that first space when you first open an episode, it can already work a lot harder for you by just having a really rich title, links to the big listening platforms, and then an embedded audio player of your choosing. I don't really mind if it's a YouTube video, a Shopify playlist, or a
Stop it.
Libsyn player.
Spotify. We're just gonna assume for
Oh, God, I
the
should have
grounds
added
of this
those,
interview,
yeah.
every single time Amy says Shopify,
Yeah.
she's talking about Spotify.
If
But
one of them
again, you
could
want
rename their
both,
business. I know.
right?
It's yeah, 2 words I have to say so often.
Fair. Sorry. So you were saying having a link with a player, so that
Yep.
doesn't matter which one it is.
Well, we try to put in, so yeah, the actual player doesn't matter which one it is, as long as anybody can click play and hear your voice. And then we get into the episode notes. So what I sometimes see podcasters do, which I'm not going to go as far as to say it's a mistake because it's so common, but they'll often have these really repetitive notes where they might have 70 episodes with 3 paragraphs of episodes in each episode notes. Oh my days.
Episode show notes.
Episode show notes each, but it might be that in those 3 paragraphs, 2 of the paragraphs are the same for every episode. It might be that classic about the podcast paragraph and that about our sponsors or partners paragraph.
Okay, side note. I want to let me just make a side note. This is just sad. I hate this too. I hate it to my core because people don't think user behavior. And so if every single episode has like the same blurb, how are you as the user going to make a decision if you want to hit play or not? If the title doesn't like do anything for you. So and the blurb, like I don't care. Give me what it is. So what you're going to say, sorry?
This is exactly like Google is the same as your users. You are giving Google, if you are giving Google 70 pages of your website or 70 episodes where 2/3 of that information, that data is exactly the same, you are telling Google those 70 episodes are the same episodes. So it's not going to be able to rank episode 40 above episode 73 for the person who desperately needs the content in episode 40. So making sure that those show notes are as unique as possible every single time and really putting in the effort to write long old descriptions. And this is probably one of the first places where I'm going to say that AI is going to come in handy, because AI is really good at taking your transcript and at least starting to extract some useful show notes from that make a much better, much more SEO-y option for your podcast notes as well.
Yeah, and on those, I'm gonna say that I have show notes on this episode, and I'll include in the links episodes where I'm talking about how to better title your episodes. And like we have an episode just about podcast SEO that I did with Sarah McDowell. And those episodes were really, really practical. And another thing that drives me bananas that I think it's such a no is to just basically, and again, we're looking at like, if you want to stand out as a thought leader in your industry, we cannot do lazy habits that make us look sloppy. And that is to just copy and paste your guest's bio. If the episode is not a profile, if you're talking about a topic, why start with your guest's bio? Nobody cares. They care about the thing. Like your guest is the vehicle. Okay, so beefy show notes. Okay, awesome.
Yes,
and then
really specific ones.
Perfect. Yes. And then I would say when we're talking about best practices, even in episodes, like there's the backlinking and the internal linking as well, right? So would you mind talking about that a little bit?
Yeah, so backlinks is a link from any other website to your website, and they are SEO gold. So a link from your podcast page to another, for example, your guest's page, that would be an outbound link, which is still good, but it's not the gold that we want. However, one of the reasons, to go on a slight tangent that I'm sure we would have covered at some point in the chat, is that backlinks from your guests to your website are incredible. And so many podcasters do not follow up with their guests to send them things like to send them their logos, to send them their cover graphics, so that it makes it easier for their guests to go onto their own website and say, hey, you can hear me on the podcast space. So making sure that if you do have guests, if you do have anyone with their own website coming onto your podcast, to make sure you are sending them follow up with all of their assets that they could add to their website. So, but yeah, internal links are links to other pages on your website. So one thing that I like to do, again, I spend a lot of time comparing a podcast website to an online shop, because it's just kind of a lot more in common with an online shop than a service, like than a business's website. And that's having those related episodes at the end. So making sure that at the end of all of your podcast episodes, it's not just, again, that latest feed. So many podcasters put so much emphasis on the most recent episodes, which is great, but it's not often that the most recent 4 or 6 episodes are the best ones for that user. So actually manually handpicking, if you like this episode with this founder, you will like these 5 founders as well. Or if you liked hearing this episode that was focused on sustainability, here's 3 other episodes where we talk about sustainability, and just actually putting in that effort to think like, I mean, as a host of podcast as well, you've listened to every episode, or as a producer, you've listened to every episode. You should be able to curate that kind of that next step to keep that user on your website, to keep them listening to your episodes.
Yeah, and even at the back of that, as a strategist, I always tell clients, how can we make this podcast bingeable and giving
Yeah.
them a reason to listen? Because again, people will be curious. So your downloads will be increasing if you build this into a consistent habit into your podcast. Okay, all right, next, let's delve into something. And now I'm just like, boom, 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 let's go.
Oh, well, I was going to say another thing to put into your episodes, show note pages or episode pages are just any resources that have been discussed. The amount of podcast episodes I have listened to where someone's mentioned a book or a restaurant or a technology, and I'm like, oh, I'll go back and listen to that. And I know I never will, but I've gone back to websites and I've gone back to show notes and been like, could you not have just like put the link in? Like, I want to give you money, especially if you are like registered as an affiliate with like bookstores, for example, which is a really easy way to monetize your podcast website as well, and to actually just include those links too. I mean, as well, if you've got like a leadership podcast, you probably have a lot of people on interviewing people who have books coming out, and you probably want to have a reading list of those books as well. So just making sure it's really easy to help your listeners to find the things that you're already talking about.
Yes, yes. And honestly, to me, if you mention something and you don't include it in the show notes and you're like, oh, we'll include it in the show notes. I'm like, where is it? Especially if there's like
Hmm.
weird multitasking. So being able to go back
Hmm.
to that episode and knowing that you can find that information positions you as like someone who takes their work seriously and is cautious about those pieces of information that do matter. All right. Okay.
I've
So
got two last tips for this podcast
let's go.
episode
Let's
page.
go.
One, give your sponsor some space. And if you don't yet have a sponsor, if you don't yet have a partner, put a space there saying, if you would like to become a sponsor, here's where to find out more information. But also all of your sponsors are looking for backlinks too. Like they get a lot of their own benefit out of your backlinks. So by giving a spot to Shopify, now I said that one on purpose. But if you've got Shopify, or if you've got an independent business, giving them a space on your episode pages means if they sponsor 12 episodes, they get 12 links, which is a lot more valuable than one link at the footer that only exists while they're the active sponsor. And then also to give yourself space on that page as well to promote your own services. So I like to kind of put these in, and I do it in my own blog because I'm a blogger more than a podcaster, but I always call them like in blog ads, where I've got like a little space halfway down an article that promotes one of our web design services. But I want that on your episode pages as well. If you do one-to-one consulting, if you've got a program, include an ad for your own program on that page. It doesn't just have to be an ad within the podcast audio. You can put it on the page, and it is so good for your SEO to create those links between your podcast content and your sales content as well.
Yeah, and let me say something. I'm actually this conversation is coming such a fun time because I'm working on a website redo. So basically like the tabs, the links, everything is broken, Amy. I am so not happy in the upcoming days because everything is a broken link these days. But anyway, fun times for me. But something that has worked incredibly well to land new subscribers is to build a very visual like block to get people on my newsletter. I did some research into some people who are in the email marketing world, and I saw that a lot of them had that, or websites that are more generic, not necessarily like a personal brand, more like a corporate brand. And they did that. And I was like, oh, really interesting. And I saw about like a 25% consistent growth in terms of new subscribers just simply from doing that in the show notes, which I was like, this is so awesome. But those products, again, people are so hard to sell products, especially if they're thought leaders and they're talking about their own expertise. Let's make it stand out basically on that article, not like a little itty bitty link that is like, okay, if you want to buy from me, here's
where you can find out more about me, and not just an actual thing that I've made that's really great that you would really like to buy. That's something that we think a lot about in all types of our like web design projects. Is always that, what is the smallest positive step that we can give someone to take next? So like if I compare it again to like a blog post template, I'm always thinking, okay, what's reasonable after someone's read a blog article? Okay, I can send them to one of my services. I can tell them about my social media platforms, or the ones that I maintain, like Instagram. I can get them onto the mailing list, and just making sure that, okay, every single page where that's a step, there is the option for someone to click through to those. I don't try to do them so they dominate over something else. But I just want to make it really easy so that the person who's reading my blog article is like, I wonder if they're on Instagram. Oh, look, I can find a nice Instagram button. Or I wonder if I can sign up to the mailing list. Oh, look, I've got to the end and there's a mailing list sign up. what I never want to see on websites, which is something that a lot of podcasters do, especially like, I'm not hating on Squarespace. Squarespace is a great platform for a lot of reasons, but I see so many podcasters who use Squarespace, and you get to the end of a podcast episode page and it's just a cul-de-sac. It's done. That is the end of that content. There is nowhere else to go. And it's such a waste of such an engaged audience. If someone's read all the way to the bottom of an episode show notes, like, they are kind of as hot as they get as a website user. We want to give them somewhere to go next, something to do next. We want to keep them inside of your brand environment, whether that's social media or whether that's sending them to subscribe on Spotify, or even if you've got like podcast merch, sending them to your shop to buy merch. Just send them somewhere next, give them options, and just never end your episodes with just like it's over now.
Yeah, it's like an abrupt end of a
Mm-hmm.
conversation. Yeah, for sure. I love that tip because yeah, this is what I call like bulk work, right? You can basically sit down and batch all of this. Like this is something that I do. Sometimes I publish my episodes and I'm so done by that point because I created all the assets and like I'm exhausted. But then I can block some time on a Friday, which is business day, where I just go through, okay, like find those broken links. You can optimize those pages just by sitting down and go, all right, web work hat on, let's go, baby.
Mm-hmm.
So
I mean, SEO wise, iterations of content, so going into content and updating it and tweaking it and optimizing it, is a really good SEO, like positive SEO indicator. It can actually help your content rank better if you go back to that episode that you recorded 18 months ago and fix the links from that guest who's changed their Instagram handle, or added an extra resource, or maybe they've released a book since and you can mention their book, or you can link it to an episode that came out 7 months later. All of these changes are just really beneficial. And we have like a little, I call it like a 20 a month process that we recommend. So this works for e-commerce brands to do it for their products, for bloggers to do it for their articles, where we say every month, I want you to optimize. And by optimize, a lot of time, just open it and read it and review it. But your 5 most recent podcast episodes, your 5 most listened to podcast episodes, 5 that are coming back into season or that are started to trend, and then 5 that I always say are like undersellers, but it's just 5 episodes that you really love that aren't performing as well as you think they should perform. And getting into this 20 a month habit can really help boost SEO. And also sometimes it can save your favorite episodes that might not be performing well, because it might have just been that it had a few broken links in, or it had some bad pictures in that you've gone in and fixed. And that was all it needed to start appearing in Google search results.
yeah, and I'm gonna add this episode is just like, and then Anna adds her 2 cents. I'm sorry, but I think like I do some of these things that I test to see what works and what doesn't. And again, there's another category that I would like to have podcasters consider, which is your super episodes. And so sometimes putting that in front of them, like our team's favorites or whatever, like that is something that I think works really well because you know more than your users need in their journey. So sometimes a little nudge onto those super episodes are like just getting them like closer to buying, I guess, in a way, if you have a product.
This is something that I would, again, I keep comparing everything to online shops, but with a e-commerce website, we always talk about digital merchandising, which is making sure in particular that the homepage, but throughout the site, is that it's set up for what is the most likely to sell right now, or what is the most beneficial to your business right now. So for example, if you are a tech leader with a podcast and you've got a handful of episodes on different AI topics, and maybe you're actually about to go out and pitch for a massive AI project for your own business, sometimes it could be really beneficial to then pick some of your favorite AI episodes and put them on your homepage to demonstrate your expertise. Just
Love
actually
that.
using it like these are all, each episode, like treating it like an individual product, saying, okay, which product is selling right now, or which product would it benefit me most for people to see right now, and just shoving them straight to the top of your homepage, putting them in your menu at the top, putting them as a starter pack in your website footer. There are so many places where you can use your podcast back catalog to your advantage.
Yeah, and I love what you said about the footer, because the footer is a place that, like the very end of the website, people will scroll, and I've been seeing really cool footer strategies that I'm like, I want to steal that. So can you talk about footer strategies and why they're important and versus the main menu?
Yeah, so every single page on your website generally only has 2 things in common: your website header and your website footer. And because your website footer is on every page on your website, it means whatever text or content you include in that footer is also on every page on your website. So one of my really small footer tips that I give to every type of brand, every type of business, is to write proudly based in with your city name, or proudly recorded in. For example, I built a website for Liz Mosley and building your brand, and in her website footer, it says proudly recording in Cardiff, Wales. I think it says Cardiff, Wales. It definitely says Cardiff. But that's just something that if you want to get just a little bit of local SEO on your site, if you want to start ranking higher for local searchers, it won't prevent you from ranking for people from further away. It just gives you an extra boost locally. Is popping that in there. Having a mini bio for your podcast, or maybe even a mini bio for the podcast host as well. I like to put, again, another sponsor logo in the footer or another partner logo, because we want to suck up to our sponsors and partners to basically make you as attractive and memorable as possible, because you are competing for that sponsor's attention against every other podcast that sponsor is sponsoring. So if you can give them a logo in the footer, if you can give them that prominent position, that makes you a lot more attractive than the person who maybe only mentions you in audio during the episode as well. And then also to have helpful links to things like different collections of episodes. And this is also where I like to put pages that you want people to be able to find, but you don't want to necessarily send all of your visitors to. So this is where I have things like one of my favorite pages to build on a podcast website, which is pitching guidelines, to make sure that anybody who wants to write a pitch for your podcast can find a space where you can actually say, these are the stories that I like. These are not the stories that I like. You need to have a microphone. You need to have a headshot. Here is all the information to pitch to me, which is one of my favorite pages, because I found that a few podcasters that we've created this for have always found that awkward moment of when they get like a bad pitch and you don't really know what to do. And sometimes this can be a really helpful page to just send someone to. For example, if someone sent you a bad pitch and you're like, okay, not now, not this story, but check out this page on my website where I've gone into a lot more detail about the things that I would post about. If it is that like spam podcast pitch, they've sent it to 500 podcasts, they will not do anything and you can ignore it because you've been polite and helpful. And if it's someone that maybe you do really like and you want to hear more of, they can read it and maybe like tweak their pitch, send you a stronger story, send you something that you haven't already heard before. So yeah, that's a really great place for that. I also like to use the footer for things like your sponsorship packages, so that your sponsors, who are also your website visitors, can come to your site and find out all the perks of sponsoring your podcast, all the perks of working with you. Can find things like your media kit, which way too many podcasters bury their media kits, making it so hard to sponsor you. It's blows my mind.
Right. Yeah. Everybody wants to make money with podcasting, but then I feel like it's like that imposter syndrome. Once you put it out, you're like, oh, then I'm associating like my brand with actually taking sponsors, and then that's scary because it means that then I'll have to figure it out. Until that they put it in there, they're not like, they're like, oh, it's just an ideal, it's not happening. But once you hit publish, you go, oh shoot, it could happen. So that is interesting. Okay, was there anything else that you were wanting to add to the footer versus headers? Or
yeah, I think it is mainly that, just giving people, like, imagine that someone's got to the end of one of your episode descriptions and then the footer, like, we want to send them somewhere else. So easy contact details, like your social media links, just the things that you would expect to find almost on like any other business website. Sometimes scroll down to your favorite online shop and be like, okay, what's helpful here? What would be helpful to my podcast audience as well? Oh, I was going to say that any bodies that you're associated with. And the other one to put in is if you've got like a list of your affiliate links, if you do have an affiliate discounts page where you can tell someone where to get X amount off of Flowdesk with your own special codes, that's a great place to put that in there and have a discounts page so that all of your listeners can come and find all of your lovely bargains in one place.
yes, I love that. Yes. Because again, I'm all about the passive marketing and making passive like decisions that will work for you while you're doing life. So I love that. Okay, awesome. I want your thoughts on this. So if a podcaster can only have a landing page for their show, and the only things they have are the player and then a list of episodes, and then maybe links to subscribe on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Is this worthwhile? Or is it better to then go with a podcast hosting platform that will create those individual pages for you? Are those Googleable, searchable?
I would say the biggest weight when it comes to your SEO is from those individual episode pages. I would say if you are having a single page about your podcast is definitely better than no page about your podcast. What I would probably say is that I maybe wouldn't go to this interstitial stage where you've just almost got like an archive of episodes, which is like, there definitely are some platforms where you can plug in your Spotify feed and it'll just generate a website. I probably wouldn't do that because it doesn't really offer anything over than what's on Spotify or what's on Apple Podcasts. What I would do is if you're running WordPress or if you're running Squarespace, they will allow you to add like a second blog and to use your blog functionality for your podcast episodes. This is an adequate compromise. Like, it would be great to have like a more specialized podcast engine, but there isn't a website that I'm aware of out there that I think is good enough for podcasters. In the same way that, to say Shopify on purpose, Shopify is a highly specialized e-commerce platform, and it does a lot of things for products really, really well. And I have, as far as I'm aware, there is not an equivalent for podcast episodes that really not only just gives you the website, but actually has that power behind it to help you merchandise your episodes. So I would say I would have that page, but if you can kind of use your blog to host your episodes, or on Squarespace, create a second blog, because a lot of Squarespace templates will allow you to run
That's
two
what I
blogs
do,
at the same
actually.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the compromise that I generally suggest to any podcaster who's DIY'd their website, because whilst it's not perfect, it'll do. Like, it allows you to tick enough boxes to get by.
Yeah, that's interesting. You're saying one platform that I do use, and I've actually added, this was forever ago, but Captivate does integrate with WordPress, and they have a widget that will basically create a blog post on your website and is very customizable. What I'm curious about is truly the impact of SEO on it. Again, it depends on your tech level. If it's either that or nothing.
Yeah,
It's
I would say like
something.
definitely do as much as you can. I think the thing that I say almost like blows my mind, and this is why Studio Cotton originally went into the podcast industry, is so we work with small businesses. We've been building websites for independent businesses since 2016. And basically 2 of our clients around the same time both had podcasts as well as their businesses. So we kind of built this podcast engine into the back of their WordPress websites. And then because the podcast content is so good for SEO, like, there are not that many ways in life that we can impact how our websites rank, especially compared to huge brands, for example. And one of the best ways you can do it is by having content on our website, and specifically text content, because as much as Google says it can listen to audio, we are not seeing the evidence of that. Like, if you want to rank higher
Same.
and more often on Google, you need words. Like, you need to write stuff down. And so whatever you can do to write as much stuff down from your podcast onto your website, the better. So that's why I am like so fervent on getting everyone to create individual
Yes.
podcast episode pages. But if you can just get that one landing page, then that's better than nothing. If you can find like an in-between solution, like a plugin that might add content, that's a bit better. But this is something where I know from the business world, like, podcast content is so freaking good for SEO that massive businesses are starting podcasts for the SEO benefit, for like the PR benefit as well, but hugely for the SEO benefit. And this is where I see like podcasters, like pure unadulterated podcasters, who have all of these same SEO rich assets, and they kind of just don't do anything with them. They kind of have just an audio player. And I'm like, it's almost like you've got like a pot of gold and you just sat next to it instead of using it. Like,
Yeah.
you've got it. You've got all of this great stuff. Like, it's something that, to use all of the cliches, like, you just need to unlock the power of it. You just need to put it on your website, write more words on your website about your podcast content.
Yeah, I agree. And there's 2 things that I saw on these Facebook groups that I'm like, are transcripts good for SEO? Do they do anything, especially if they're literally a block of text? I hear people saying yes and no. What are your thoughts?
Okay, so transcripts, if you've got a transcript on the page, it's better than nothing on the page. But the issue with podcast transcripts is that a lot of the content in it is filler, because that's how humans communicate. Like, we say, like, communicate, like I just did. And so when it comes to SEO, we kind of want to be really specific and really concise, because that's what Google latches onto. And because transcripts are like one long block of text that rarely have like a hierarchy, they don't really have headings and sections, is that it's definitely better than no text, but it's not great. That said, I still want podcast websites to have transcripts for accessibility needs. And also it does help with things like, if it's like a previous listener that wanted to go back to an episode and find something people were talking about, they can hit Command F or Control F on their keyboard and search a transcript to find the timestamp. What is much, much better is to have those specific show notes, or to have timestamped sections of your like highlights of an episode, or even to pull out highlights of an episode into, like, almost turn that episode into a blog article, for example. Like, it doesn't have to be a separate piece of content. Actually pull out 5 things I learned in my podcast interview with Anna Xavier, for example. Like, that would be a great podcast show notes kind of blog style.
That is really good. Okay, that is awesome. I think like some formatting is always super useful, but that's really good to know that, yeah, like if you're someone who's like, I talk about a lot of specific things that can be quoted and stuff like that, that's a really good for thought. Let's talk about for a second your quick tools that you're really liking right now that you consider good recommendations for podcasters to either improve their website or if they can kind of be a crutch if you're lacking specific skills to help their website look better.
Yeah, I mean, first thing I would look at is Google Search Console because it's free and so few website owners just have it set up in general. To set up Google Search Console, basically, it'll tell you how people are finding your website via Google searches, but you do then just have to connect it to wherever you purchased your domain. So it's a little bit fiddly to set up, but I would say anybody can do it with a couple of minutes to spare. But Google Search Console will tell you what people are typing into Google in order to find your podcast, in order to find your business. And that can sometimes reveal like topic ideas that you want to talk about, or even reveal which guests have been the most beneficial to your search results. So I really recommend just getting that set up and just start, I keep saying like noodling it, just like actually keep like playing with the graph, seeing what pages are useful. It'll also tell you if any pages aren't being indexed. So like one thing that I see really commonly with podcasts is that sometimes those episode pages won't be indexed by Google because they have too much duplicate content on them because someone has copied and pasted show notes over 70 episodes. So I would get that set up. One thing that I also want people to do is just keep an eye on their backlinks. So these are those links from other websites to your website. There are free backlink checkers all over the web. So I was going to say, I'm a huge lover of freebies. I wouldn't pay for this, but Ahrefs and there's SEO review tools, both have free backlink checkers. So again, run your website through that. If you score less than 10, I would make backlinks a very high priority. So yeah, those two are ones to go with. I would say in terms of website technology, if you want to have a pure podcast website that can be the best pure podcast website, I would probably look at some point of using WordPress in the future. And I'm not saying that you absolutely have to use it now, but I have just found that the all-in-one solutions like the Squarespaces and the Wixes and even the Shopifys of this world, because I was like, did you hear that tweet then?
Yeah.
We've got a clock that makes a different bird song every hour. So, I forgot that was on.
Sound effects that you didn't ask for. That's all good.
Yeah, it's just because every hour on the hour, I'd like to hear a classic British bird. But anyway, that was great. That was a great tit. So that lovely interlude. What was I saying? Yeah, WordPress is great for a podcast website. But what I would also say is, like, I know I am someone who sells professional podcast website design, but I would sincerely look at having that on your roadmap, like having it be something that you know, okay, not until I've reached 50 episodes or not until I've reached 100 episodes, like just know that at some point, part of the running cost of your brand, of your podcast is going to be that professional website. And it's something where, again, like comparing it to small businesses and comparing it to online shops, a lot of shopkeepers will start with a DIY website. They will start with Squarespace and Shopify, but they kind of know that in so many years, they know that the next stage is a professional website. And that's something that I don't see in the podcast space, even though a professional podcast website can reap so many rewards if you find the right partner / me, obviously. But yeah, like just making sure that it's on your roadmap, something that you are going to budget for in a few years' time.
Yeah, and I think that as anything in your life, you have to invest in order to get to the next level. And I feel that a lot of podcasters feel really uncomfortable in making an investment. But again, if your brand presents professional and all of those assets that you're talking about, like there's a space for a sponsor on the website, you will be making money. So it's something that makes sense. It's not spending money, it's an investment. But again, you have to like be sure that this podcast makes sense for you and your business or you and your brand. And something that I have to talk about before we close the interview is when it makes sense to use the we and the I in your brand. Would you mind explaining it briefly for our listeners?
Yeah. This is something that I feel like I get this question more than most by anybody who is writing like their own brand bios or their own about pages, because it seems like a really big stress of, should I say like, we are an independent business or I am an independent business owner? What I would generally say is that a lot more brands are we's than maybe think they are. Like if you've got freelancers, if you've got regular collaborators, you're probably a we. And the big one that I say on that is also, so for example, I've got a website design company and every now and then someone will send a message because their business is in trouble, because they're really struggling and sometimes they are literally pouring their heart out. But that message goes to me and 3 other people. It goes to everyone on my team. And so I want to make sure that people know that when they're sending me a message, like it's going to Studio Cost and it's not going to Aime. And I feel like on the other side of that, so sometimes if you have sent a message where you're pouring a heart out because you think you're connecting with someone, because maybe you formed a relationship with them via social media and then you get a reply from someone else. It can like make people feel like a little bit like a kick in the gut. And so I would generally say that if you are ever going to use someone to answer your messages who is not you, go with we. It's a safer choice. And the other side of that is if you have ambitions to be more than you, just use we now, because otherwise when it comes around to switching over your website, you're probably not going to find all of the I's. Like, it just saves future you a lot of time. So I think I'm in the minority because I know like a lot of web copywriters are really focused on using the I for the individual, but there's a lot of value in we. And just because you say we, it doesn't mean that you're pretending that you're bigger than you are. I think people think like you can either be like a one person business or like a multi-thousand person faceless corporation. Like, there's like 5 people businesses. There's a whole lot of 3 people businesses. There's some 20 people businesses. There are very valid times to use we. So I'm very pro we. So
And
odd
then,
sentence to end on.
yes, and then the I is the only place you recommended was the blogs, right?
Yeah, definitely. So blog articles should be subjective. Like, they are evolutions of a diary. They should be one advice from one person to another. And this is also where you can massively stand out from AI written content. And that is something that in SEO world, this could be like a whole other topic of its own. But we are seeing the internet being almost destroyed with an influx of AI written articles. And it's making it really difficult to stand out. So we want to make sure that anybody who is writing blog articles, and if you are writing episode show notes and you want to do those in the first person, I could see that as well. I would probably stick to we, because again, I'm a we lover. But it just means that like people can again learn expertise, because the example I use, we've got an article on our website about the best coffee shops in Bristol in our city. And if I am going to another city and looking for the best coffee shops, I don't want some faceless article about it. I want to have advice from the biggest coffee snob with the highest standards, who only likes like the best coffees. Like, I want that snob's opinion. I don't want a faceless opinion. I don't want to know about Costas and Pretz. I want to know about the fanciest coffee in your city. So making sure that your articles are written and they are laden with your personal opinions, it only makes your content stand out. It makes you way more human and way more relatable too.
Yeah, I think I agree with that for sure. And I personally find it really bizarre when I go into someone's show notes and it's written in the third person. The show notes
Yeah.
on the player, you're a person talking to me. Podcasts are supposed to be intimate. So the third person to me throws me off a
Yeah.
lot. So I always tell AI to write it in the first person when it is writing my show
Nice.
notes for sure.
I think that's one thing to actually add into your show notes as well, is why you, the host, love this episode. That's one thing that I see missing from a lot of them. And the same for for blog posts as well, is like, actually, why are you writing about this topic? Why did you pick this conversation? Why did you invite Liz Mosley onto your podcast? And after you spoke to Liz Mosley, what did you love about hearing from Liz Mosley? This also, as a nice way to tie it into blogging, this makes a really good way to turn your podcast episodes into blog content, because you can write articles like my favorite interviews from creative leaders, and then actually write like a tiny bit of the episode synopsis, and then your sentence or two about why you are picking this episode to go into this blog article. So I'm a huge fan of just content that AI couldn't have written. Like, I want your opinions and expertise. I want to know what coffee you like and why you like Liz Mosley. Now it sounds like I'm obsessed with Liz Mosley, and I am a little bit, but yeah, like
She's awesome. No wonder, she's so cool. And she has like all of these like neat things happening. So yeah, I mean, people will have to listen to the upcoming episode to figure out how cool Liz is.
Yes. I already recommend that episode, even though it hasn't yet been recorded.
Yes. Yes, for sure. One fun fact for the listeners, actually. So I'm a multilingual. I think that I write decent copy. I'm not Shakespeare, but I always write what I think is useful for people. I have conversations and I keep those on a docket, and I think it's super useful for podcasters as well. If you are a business owner, questions your listeners send you, conversations you have with peers at conferences, like a DM you received. Those are super, super useful. And I remember at some point researching, and you know where I'm going with this, researching, because I am a big advocate of women-owned businesses, sustainability, green living, and like small Black-owned businesses. And so I remember thinking, when I have my book, I want an article that features, the people that I see, that isn't like a gifts for podcasters, and it's just like a
Mhm.
sign on the door that is like you can Amazon it, or like, or a microphone, because also, let's be honest, if you're a podcaster and you've been gifted a podcast microphone, it's gonna be terrible because people are gonna be like, podcast
Mhm.
kit. So I thought, let me create an article that is based on these things that I value, and find quirky things like earrings that are like microphones. They are cute on Etsy, or like a sign on the door that actually is cute. And I wrote that article, no joke. I was in France because my husband's French. I was writing the article 23rd of December. Because I had one of those classic, like, we're leaving town, it was so busy, and I was like, I want this article to be here. I know nobody's gonna buy this right now, but I want this article to be available. So right before Christmas, I was like, it's not that it's not gonna do anything for me. I haven't even written the book, but I was like, whatever, it's gonna be out here. And then something really funny happened, because I wrote that article just out of being helpful. And then you messaged me because something really interesting happened.
Yeah, yeah. So before we exhibited at the podcast show in London last year, I wanted something on a stand to give away to people walking past, but people like the people would actually want and keep, which is, I know, everybody loves stickers, and we definitely did go with stickers in the end, but we wanted something a bit bigger. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to spend, I don't know, half an hour Googling gifts for podcasters because I wanted just something to give away. And I must have gone through like 20 or 30 AI written articles, or ones that were written so close to AI, which were basically buy someone a chair, buy someone a microphone, buy someone software. Who wants software as a gift? And I don't know what software to buy for someone. And there was also things like put their logo on something. I'm like, what? How are you going to get their lovely high res logo files? But I said, like, I was going through all of these articles that were all basically the same article, and I was like giving up. And then I got to this one article, and I was like, oh my god, it's written by human. Like, I will say, wasn't the best article in the world, but it actually had like like SEO wise wasn't the best, but it had ideas and things that someone had actually thought. And then I bookmarked it. I sent it to Liz Mosley, who we are both now obsessed with. And I said, like, are these good ideas? And it was the door hanger that caught my eye. And she was like, yeah, it's amazing. It's genius. And then I didn't end up getting anything sorted because I am terribly disorganized. But then we met at the podcast show and had like a long conversation. We had a follow-up chat later. And then I was writing an article that's on our website now about how to spot a chat GPT article using this anecdote. And I went back through my search history to find this blog post that had these ideas. That was the first one that stood out next to all the AI content. And then I saw it was your name at the top of it. And I was like, what? Blew my gosh darn mind, because like 3 months before we went to the podcast show, I was already talking about you, and talking about you in a really positive way, because you wrote that one article, because you just were like, I've got some ideas, I'm just going to get them out of my brain. And because they were your subjective ideas, because you were really specific and found a pair of microphone shaped earrings, it made you so much more memorable than buy a microphone. Because no one's going to buy it. Like, I don't want to buy you a microphone. I don't know why I said it like that. If you need a microphone, I guess I can lend you a microphone. But,
Yeah, but
yeah. But yeah, it's such a huge, it's like almost circles right back to like the very beginning of this conversation, when we were talking about sometimes you publish an article because you just want to write about it, and because it's relevant to your brand, and because you've got like specific expertise, and you don't know what difference it's going to make a year down the line or 5 months down the line.
yeah, for sure. And it's funny because I get a lot of people asking me the microphone earrings all the time. And I'm like, I send them the link to the article. I'm like, give me the traffic. But yeah, like, it's one of those things that, again, like, it's something that is different. And I created that article maybe in 2022 or 2023. I can't recall. And again, it still makes its way out. So you may think that like SEO can be as simple as this. I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah.
Create something that is like, you can leverage AI to sound like you, but don't let AI write the whole darn thing or pick it for you, because it's going to be silly. So anyway, Aime, it was great talking to you. I'm going to, of course, make room for you to talk directly to our listeners and tell them how to connect with you. And then we're going to close the show, because my gosh, we covered so much. This has been such a delight. Thank you for being on the show.
Well, thank you for having me. So yeah, you can follow Studio Cotton on Instagram. And I say Studio Cotton, it's just me. So at studio.cotton. On our website, on our Studio Cotton blog, we've got lots of articles specifically around podcast websites, including a 2-part series on how to design a professional podcast website. So I really recommend checking that out at studiocotton.co.uk. blog. And if you want a very, very nice website for your podcast, we also build websites for podcasts. So check that out. All the details are on our website, studiocotton.co.uk. And I think that's all I've got. But yeah, come check me out and my awesome advice for brands and podcasts.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amy. And for
Thank
you
you.
listening, I want to invite you to check all of the incredible resources we talked about in this episode in the show notes, because yes, they will be there. All the things we talked about. So go and visit those and continue creating imperfect content that drives you forward. Any resources you may need will be available as well at thepodcastspace.com. Talk to us on Instagram, and I'll see you there. Bye now.